let me just say this. I want to thank Marlon for giving me this opportunity to talk to him on this very special day. I was on another station doing some commentary and I just felt lacking. And I said, wow, I should have thought about this before, and called up Marlon and said, Marlon, we need to have this discussion. And I'm twiddling my fingers. Is he going to be available? Is he going to be available? And thankfully, my brother from another mother, from another coast, said he could do it. So my brother, Marlon Weems, thank you so kindly for being a part of this discussion on the real Martin Luther King, not the fantasy that we have today. Thank you so kindly for speaking with us today.
Hey, I'm glad you reached out, Egberto, and I will tell you, it's like the planets lined up, because I actually had an appointment to get an X-ray on my fractured leg, and the short version is they screwed up, and I got there and they were like, "Oh, you didn't get the message." And so I ended up, I walked in the door and I just happened to look at my phone, and just a few minutes earlier you had reached out. So I guess it worked out.
It worked out great. But you know what? It turns out that the universe realized that this is a subject we needed.
It's important, man.
It is important. Well, let me tell you, I want to start where I left off at WBAI. And what I said is that Martin Luther King, but we talk about all progressives right now that have this economic topic that they talk about, and they try to restrict Martin Luther King into a racial domain. Mm-hmm. And he is so much more than that. And had he lived, and the truth of the matter is, I don't think in those days they would have ever allowed him to live, given what he really stood for economically, relative to international policy, and relative to our own economic system as capitalism is concerned. What are your thoughts on that?
This is something that I was doing a live with Eleanor Anstruther over the weekend, and this very topic came up because, well, I was actually talking, speaking a little broader than Martin Luther King, but just historically, whenever we have a situation where these movements. So, for example, I was talking about Wilmington, which is not far from where I live, and how the Wilmington massacre that we know about, which was the only successful coup in American history, it wasn't just Black people that were the target. It was also white people, because it was white allies. So once these people, the light bulb went off, and the poor white people realized that they were much more closely aligned with Black Republicans, as it were, at the time. So I was talking about that, and I mentioned that Martin Luther King, while he was problematic for the United States government, he really became a problem when he moved beyond just civil rights for Black people or Negro people at the time, right? When he started talking about Poor People's Campaign and bringing in the white, hillbillies and all these folks, that's when the real trouble started. Same thing with, guys like Fred Hampton, and we see it over and over. But to your point, we often, or at least a lot of people, try to minimize King to the dream speech. And that's kind of all, that's all our kids get taught. And, a couple of other things, maybe the march on Selma, or, in Selma to, Birmingham, and all of that kind of thing. But as you say, he, and I think he had sort of an awakening too. And I actually posted something that I wrote a few years ago talking about the Chicago Freedom Movement and how he was so shocked when he went to Chicago at the level of racism that was waiting on him. And he just, I guess,
not in the South.
In his mind, he thought, Jim Crow was sort of the extent of it, until he got to Chicago, and he was, he was really stunned. And so, I wrote something about that. I actually saw I'm sure it's still on HBO, a documentary. I forget the name of it. but I'm sure it's easy to find. And the title of my article is Dixie Ain't Just in the South.
I'm glad you brought that up. And before we even continue the conversation, I want to tell our audience something that I think we should be cognizant of, right? Let me just say from a point of view of based on where I am from in Central America and moving here to the United States and living in the South and living in the North. I'll be honest with you. I really love the South. I love the cordiality of the South. I love the sentimentality of the South, not slavery or anything. But one of the things that many people have a tendency to believe is that somehow racism is worse in the South than it is up north or in the Midwest or whatever. And having been all over the country, I can tell you one thing categorically. It's not the same. The type of racism is not the same. And I'll tell you also bluntly, I can't, except for the lack of paying right kind of taxes and that sort of stuff, I actually prefer the racism in the South than the racism in the North. Because I think the racism in the South, in the North is very, very dangerous in the way it is implemented. I want to remind folks that the big bus riots didn't occur in the South. It occurred in Boston. I want to remind you about the meatpacking plants in Chicago and the separation as the Southerners moved into Chicago. So the reality is we have a racialized society and based on an economic system that is defined by race, and race is a tool that have been used for a long time as an economic struggle against our white brothers and sisters. But racism is there for an economic system, not for what many people think of. And I think at the end, if you look at Martin Luther King's writing, he came to that realization when he spoke about the liberals who wanted to just go this far, right? Mm-hmm. When he spoke about really the sanitation worker that ultimately wouldn't have been just for the sanitation black workers, but workers in general. And that made the system fearful. And then he made the biggest mistake and spoke out against the military-industrial complex, the Vietnam War.
That was that.
Finish it up for me, my brother. Finish that up for me.
No, it is very similar, isn't it, to if you think about them sort of in tandem, mm-hmm. as he was having that revelation, Malcolm X was having a similar one when he went to Mecca and was
yes.
Hey, hang on a second, there are actually white blue-eyed Muslims. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
And I just think it's just kind of an interesting juxtaposition.
Do you know, Marlon, do you know what the convergence of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King would have done? Because the stress, the economic stress in this country, they wanted to make it racialized. But the economic stress in this country has never been racialized. The racialization was used to distract, right? I have this phrase that I use on my program on KPFT and the others. I'd say, when we unite, and it's a stereotype. So for those who don't like stereotypes, please don't beat me up too much, but I'm going to say it anyway. When we unite Appalachia, the ghettos, and the barrios, we would have won the war. Because you know what? All the stereotype of the ghettos, the barrios, and Appalachia is the same, just different ethnicities. And when those guys realize that they've all been had by the system, what Martin Luther King came out and read his last speech, what he comes out and he says, it's like, wow, this guy was going to become prophetic for our economic system altogether.
You know, when you think about it, the game has always been, for new entrants into American society.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been about achieving whiteness. Now we'll never, we're the opposite end of the spectrum. And so if you, like you mentioned, these people, the Scotch Irish, the Italians, the Asians, Chinese and so on that come here always start off as just a little bit better than being black. And hopefully, if they're lucky, they get to be white. And I'm talking about in the 70s when I was in high school, there were classmates of mine that were clearly Hispanic, but they were white.
Yeah.
Almost dark as me. But yeah. I mean, there was a kid in our neighborhood, and his last name was like Sanchez. I mean, Sanchez, because it
Yeah.
couldn't really sound like Mexican, so everything was pointed. I mean, they considered themselves white people,
Well,
just like everybody else.
let me tell you about Latin America, because there are a lot of when I came to the United States, and I went to the University of Texas, and I didn't know all the history about Texas and the United States, just starting to accept people who looked like me. In the university, I came into universities in the 80s, and I think they got their first person of color or something like that. I think it was in the 70s or something like that. So for all practical purposes, as a sort of a relative newcomer. So I got there, and one of the first things that I did is I looked for some of the engineering clubs and the culture clubs. And the one that I looked for was one called the Afro-American Culture Committee. And I joined the Afro-American Culture Committee, and we were sitting down listening to Martin Luther King. And this is in the 80s, man. We sat down listening to Martin Luther King. And at the time, I said, as we listened to the I Have a Dream speech and the others, and I'll be honest, I didn't know about Malcolm X's transition when he started to talk strongly about the economics and capitalism and militarism and all of that. I hadn't yet got into that with MLK. So I was listening to Malcolm X as well. And when we sat down in this room and we were listening to the wording of Martin Luther King, I said, I love MLK, and I love that he wanted to bring peace. But I'm from a part of the world where you have to take your freedom, right? You don't ask your freedom to be ceded. That is what was appealing to me with Malcolm X. Malcolm X wasn't in for hurting anybody, but he said, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you. If this country is free, it's going to be free for me too. And I like that attitude, as opposed to having others ceding me my freedom. And again, like I said, I'll be honest, I wasn't well read in where MLK had grown to, right? And I also wasn't well aware of where Malcolm X had grown to. Because remember, I talk about these guys converging. And I remember this guy got real upset at me, and he said, you don't know what you're talking about. And anyhow, you are not one of us. You are an import.
Wow.
Here I am, a 19-year-old kid in the 80s, and this guy calls me an import, and I'm not one of them. I had two choices to make: walk out of that room or start talking history. And I looked at the guy and I said, there is nobody in this hemisphere who looks like me, who nobody could distinguish between you and me anyhow, came over here in a pleasure ship. None of us came over here in a pleasure ship. While your folks encountered slavery in English. Mine encountered slavery in Spanish and English.
Mm-hmm.
So please don't tell me that I'm just an import. And I was a nutcase then. I really got upset then that, in effect, these guys, and believe it or not, that's one of the reasons that I am not into the ADOS movement. I don't know if you've heard of the ADOS.
I was thinking about that the whole time that you were making that comment. And, it's just, to me, it's one of those things that just almost seems like a psyop,
Yes.
It almost seems like something constructed by somebody.
Yes.
To just have us, factionalized for nothing.
Yes.
Because, look, why is it that we're really just now hearing about this movement?
Right.
We've been here a minute. Why? Now I will say, when I was at the University of Arkansas, there were quite a few Ethiopians and Nigerians and so forth from, and a lot of people from the Middle East. I learned about the Shah of Iran because, or Iran, because you tell my Arkansas came out there for a second, didn't it?
Iran.
Shah of Iran. So yeah, but that's how I learned about it, because there were so many Persian students that were protesting, and it was really kind of scary. They were wearing pillowcases over their head just in fear of their lives. And I had never seen anything like that. I'd never really met people that were actually from Africa.
Right.
And I bring it up because they were somewhat standoffish about us.
Right.
because they had been fed all the propaganda about how dumb we were supposed to be and uncivilized and so on. And so they kind of looked at us sideways. Now, as time goes on, you get to know people. And I actually, the fraternity that I'm a member of, I actually pledged with three guys from Nigeria. So we all got to be friends, but it's just really interesting how these things pop up. And the ADOS movement just really doesn't make sense to me, because there were slaves
everywhere, the entire hemisphere.
In the hemisphere, exactly.
I went to an ADOS meeting because I want anything that gives anybody freedom. And folks, this goes Black, this goes Latino, this goes any way whatsoever. I am always going to be supporting freedom. This is not a racial thing with me, but race, because we're a racialized society, it plays its part. But it's amazing what you said there. I love when you mentioned the PSYOPs thing, right? Because remember when I spoke about Appalachia, the ghettos, and the barrios, the only way this economic system survives is if we do not understand those people that are inflicting the pain on everybody. So if I separate big groups by race, if I separate racial groups by different identities, if I create all that, there's so much commotion in those separations that you don't have enough time to work on the issues that hurts you. And you know who's doing that on steroids? Our president understands that. That's the one thing he understands. That is how create constant chaos. And he can get away with doing is cryptocurrency and all of that. There's so much other stuff happening that you cannot. There's so much other stuff happening that you cannot go ahead and look at what's really ailing you. And that is what, MLK at the end, that was his biggest fear, the fear of the government and others. Remember, Hoover was really into MLK. Hoover knew every step MLK was making. And when MLK made that change, when he made the economic and military change, his numbers would always be numbered.
I said when he came out against Vietnam.
Oh my God! Yes, it was over.
It was over.
It was over.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what's, to me, I guess, when you talk about history, is how it's almost like a momentum that we can't resist the repetition.
Right.
You can just go back and back and back, and you'll see these similar things happen over and over. They talk about the pendulum swinging.
Right.
And I was talking the other day about Obama. I couldn't believe we elected a Black president, but when we did, oh man, I cried like a baby. I was like, America's finally turned the corner. We finally turned the corner.
Man.
And the people who knew, the older people were like, honey, my sweet summer child.
I want to mention something about Obama, because I am in a very red area here. And Obama did a smart thing in going to universities and colleges and selling his book to all these kids. And these kids fell in love with him, and they went home and took his book. And they were here in Kingwood. I couldn't believe the amount of Republicans' homes that I went to as we were fundraising for Obama for America. Okay. And I remember coming home to my wife one time, and I'm saying, because I always knew we were not ready for a Black president yet. We hadn't gotten there yet when Obama got elected. That was a facade, something to make you feel good about doing something. All right, now we done do it. Now let's continue. Let's continue the path. I knew that, right? So I came home to my wife one time and I said, this stuff is scaring me, because Obama can't live up to these people's hopes. Cannot. No way. And, she said, what do you think? I said, I think he's going to win, but I don't know. And it didn't take long. And the funny thing about it is, I think Obama's biggest mistake was to follow the plutocracy, the oligarchy, the guys like from, who was the mayor of Chicago that was his chief of staff. Emmanuel.
Yeah.
They all wanted this guy to get rid of OFA. OFA makes MAGA look like a joke, how big OFA really was. Okay? OFA would have been, if OFA had stayed active, OFA was a big organization. It looked like America. I mean, when I say it looked like America, I mean OFA looked like America. And even with all the wins coming from the Tea Party, the OFA would have been a good countermeasure. But they let all of that stuff frail, right? And when they, Rahm Emanuel, thank you, Karas and Legally Abigail, when they did that, it was all over. He was in for whatever the plutocracy. And don't think that the Tea Party was a part of these guys. Okay, Obama, you're in now, but you can't go ahead and give too much health care. Okay, Obama, you're in now, but you can't give too much child care because that will go into what the plutocracy really believes in.
And you can't be too black.
Well, you know that.
Can't be too.
You know that.
And I say it that way, but what I mean is he really seemed, and I understand it, man, I really do, but it's like he did not want to be seen as doing more for black people than anybody else.
But you know what, Marlon? I think that's okay. And like you just said,
I have to disagree because let
me tell you what you mean. Okay,
we're the ones we need more because we've had more taken away from us.
Okay, here, you see, I want to frame it differently than you did. Okay, my framing is I don't want him doing more for any one group than the other. Mm-hmm. Okay, but the other group, guess what? The other group already had all these features, so he's not doing more.
Well, yeah, I mean,
see what I'm saying? We are, you know
what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean.
We deal with is when you've always had the privilege, equality feels like you're being discriminated against.
Exactly. But you know, right? What I'm saying is once you define it as he's doing more for a particular group, that is what they can hold on to. It's different when you're saying, right, I know, but what I'm saying is when you're saying you're making sure that what you had gotten, this person got too, at that point you're not doing more for group X than group Y. I'm talking about just framing. And I think one of the things that in my opinion, again, is that we frame things so wrong in that, like somebody brought up redlining, I believe, redlining, right? Took out a whole lot of, capital out of black people's wealth, right? Mm-hmm. So fixing that with mortgage deals is not giving somebody an unfair advantage. It's rectifying things. Mm-hmm. You don't want to call it reparations. It's just rectifying the numbers.
I'm looking in the comments, and Legally Abigail just made this comment about. I'll just read it. Said he bailed out the bankers and let people who did all the right things, saving for their pensions, paying their mortgages, sink into bankruptcy and despair. I was actually running a trading desk at that time in New York on Wall Street. And it's interesting. I worked for a firm that was black owned, but the numbers in terms of who worked there are more white guys working there.
But that was by necessity, right?
That's the way it was, right? But it was interesting to see that whole scenario play out from the time when, he and McCain are running and they suspended their campaigns and did all this stuff. And Obama, it's easy in retrospect. I will tell you, folks were scared to death on Wall Street about what was happening. And that seemed at the time like the easy way to fix it. And it's one of those you know what it is? It's trickle down economics. The sort of the mindset was, well, we gotta bail out the banks because that's where people put their money. And then the banks will go ahead and, loan money to folks. And, it never works. It never works. But that was the idea. And I think Obama could have been much more of a disruptor than he was willing to be, because that was the moment where he could have said, this is capitalism, right?
Let me tell you this. I remember the discussions on CNBC then, whether this crash would have ended capitalism. Okay. I remember those discussions vividly. And I will also tell you that personally, as a independent journalist at the time, I gave Obama a bigger break than I don't want to say that he deserved, but that he should have gotten, in that I was hellified mad at the bankers not going to jail. I was mad of not getting a public option in what is ultimately a healthcare system for the insurance company. I was hellified mad about all those things. But I also realized there's a president and then there's a presidency. And, could he have been more disruptive and survived? And when I say survived, I'm not talking about survive politically. I'm talking about survived.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So those are answers that I don't know. So I did give myself as on my writings and everything a pass. And I think after that, I've what is the word that you use? I think I've atoned for that in my future writings, where I said I probably should not have, right? In the way I frame certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think until the day comes that we get somebody that is a disruptor to this economic system, and I know you're wedded in the capital markets and that sort of stuff, but I just think the way it works and the way it was implemented is all wrong.
You know what, man? I will own my previous life, but I will tell you, and I think we all did, because as someone mentioned in the comments, he had a tough job.
Yeah.
He had to, and you know what? I would compare him to Jackie Robinson.
I knew that's where you were going. Yeah.
Jackie Robinson could have kicked some ass. Okay. But he knew he was the first. So he had to be exemplary in his personality. He had to hold back. And I guess in a political sense, Obama had to do a lot of that. Where, remember, he went, and I'm trying to remember if it was his budget or what it was, where he went before a group of Republicans only.
I taped that. I wrote about that.
And I was like,
yes.
Who's ever done that?
Nobody.
I had never seen it. And go ahead.
It's not only that. When he went there, he so outshined them that not even the media covered it appropriately, because you could see a different level of intellect in that meeting. You had a whole bunch of boys, and then you had somebody of intellect. And it was so evident when you watched it. It's like they could not have put that out the way it should have. I did. That's the thing about this guy. And I don't think we really talk about it in the way, like I mentioned, Jackie Robinson, or, any of the firsts, when you're the first, even in my little, much less consequential situation, I was, being one of the first black head traders, or one of the only ones on Wall Street. Or when I was in Arkansas, from the firm that hired me, that I worked for like a decade, had never had a black person in my role before. I used to joke that the head janitor wasn't even black. We had black janitors, but a white janitor was in charge. So when I got that job, one of my uncles, who was very much like a father in a lot of ways, pulled me to the side and gave me a talking to, because he knew the kind of guy I tend, always got to come back, plenty to say. And he said to me, I'm just going to say it like he said it. He said, Marlon, you got this job. It's a good job. But the first time one of these white men calls you a nigger, you cannot hit that guy, because what's going to happen is your career will be over. You'll lose that job and you'll never get another job. Yeah.
So you're just going to have to figure out how to, just how to absorb it and keep it moving. And I was like, oh, Uncle Roger, ain't nobody going to do. Shoot, man, it happened. And it wasn't quite that overt. It was, I come in from lunch and there's a piece of paper laying on my desk, and it's like N-word application for employment. And it's, all these multiple choice, favorite food, watermelon fried chicken, and I am at the premier investment firm in the region, right? And that's the kind of stuff I would occasionally have to put up with. And I would just think about, damn, Uncle Roger he was right. So all that to say, man, anytime you're the first and, where you're kind of a trailblazer, even on that small of a level, the shit comes at you.
Well, you know what, Marlon? Maybe I shouldn't have asked for atonement for giving him a break after all.
No, I'm just
getting my permission, Marlon. I'm getting my permission. Yeah. But let me tell you, I'll be honest with you. I lasted 5 years in corporate America as an engineer, and I couldn't do it. 5 years. 5 years. Let me tell you better. and I've been in business and doing all these things. And, people get on my case when I say certain things on my program, racially speaking, right? So I remember, I wrote a book called Tribulations of an Afro-Latino Caribbean Man. And the reason I wrote that book was because people would tell me, every time I bring a story, yeah, but that's just at one time. Oh, yeah, but that's just at one time. So I wrote a book, and it's easy to read, man, that was encapsulated and enumerated the things that I remembered. And it was, by the time I was done, I mean, let me give a good example. I remember having a company with a band director. And, we go to the convention to sell this software that I wrote, and we were partners. And the band director referred to me as his employee when he was talking to the people that are there, right? And my wife went ballistic. This is your company. I'm like, it's okay. I am for the dog. I remember signing contracts for technology transfers. Nobody knew what I looked like. This was before anything else. And then going to sign the contract. And when I go to conferences, I would turn my badge around so that I could go in to see people that are using my software, etc. So I remember going in to sign the contract with the guy that we had made an arrangement with. And I went and he said, Egberto, nice to meet you. I said, he looked at me first. So who are you? I'm Egberto. Turned around to his partner. Hey, John, this is Egberto. And then he said, John said, I'm sorry, but we had decided, and we were to tell you this, to go in a different direction.
Wow.
But what I'm saying is I have story after story, because those of us who are online and we talk a lot and we're saying a lot of things, people always like, oh, that's just that one time. That's just that one time. So I said, I'm going to enumerate all this stuff. And after I wrote the book, Marlon, I remembered twice as many incidences that what I put in the book with these little things. A VP calling me into his office and says, I don't know why your boss likes you, but I tell you what, if you don't finish this stuff in 6 months, I don't want to hear a damn thing about affirmative action. That was my entry. That was my entry into corporate America. I don't want to, if you don't work out, I don't want to hear a damn thing about affirmative action with the doors closed.
We tried one time and that's it.
That's it.
I've been just sort of piddling away at a memoir, and in my dreams, it's the first of two books. One, because my career is just about, not exactly, but 30 years, and the first 15 are in Arkansas, and the last half is in New York. And the experience is, there's a similarity, but a cultural difference, if that makes sense. The racism, like you were talking about in New York, is very different. But it's just as, in a way, it's worse because...
I think it's worse, yeah.
Well, I tell this story about, one day after the market closed, myself and two traders, that all of us Black, and we went to it was one of those after work events, a lot of food, a lot of free alcohol, and they're making presentations. And this particular one was, Goldman Sachs crowing about their relationships with, minority-owned investment firms and asset managers. So a lot of Black folks in the Plaza Hotel. That was where the event was. And we had been to the event, had fun, all that stuff. We're coming down the elevator, and I guess, they have all these, maybe there's a ballroom on a certain floor below us. So the door opens, and there is I assume a husband and wife, older couple. And it's wintertime. The woman's got on a mink coat. Guy's got his overcoat and a tuxedo. They're decked. And nobody's on the elevator but me and the two other guys. The elevator door opened. I'm not making this up. The woman went like this, and she grabbed her, her husband under the arm, like, oh my God, we're in like tailor-made suits, French. We're no threat to anybody, but she was still afraid of us. And she got on the elevator, man, and it was just, we couldn't even speak because we knew we'd burst out laughing. Yeah. It was so ridiculous.
I give people a lot of grace now, Marlon, because I have this new way of bringing us together that I talk about. You can't get around from how you were reared. if you look at your 5 o'clock news beforehand, I want to give some mention to Eminem. She says, "I'm a white female and have a long lifetime of stories, not even black." And let me tell you something. I've written about a whole lot of that, myself. In fact, I got into trouble for writing about. And Marlon, I don't know where you stand on this, but I pointed out that it's amazing, in my opinion, that Obama became president and still we're waiting on Hillary and Kamala. It says something about the plight of women. So I got a lot of hate when I wrote that, because when I said womanhood may actually be going through a lot more stress than blackhood, I got a lot of flack that said, no, that's not. But I think history, I don't know if you agree with me, Marlon, but I think history
where's the lie, man? I mean, I got into it with the guy, a couple of years ago. I'm having breakfast with a guy, and I just said Kamala Harris's name. She's, a joke. He called her an empty suit.
Right.
And I mean, so look, you don't have to like her politics, right? But you cannot deny the resume. Same with Hillary Clinton. You can't deny the resume.
Exactly.
Hillary's been everything but president.
Look, Hillary's biggest problem is that I think she's likely more qualified than just about every president that we had, but she was too much of a man. I mean, I
know what you're saying.
Hillary.
I think she tried to downplay the fact that she was a woman. And then the second time she sort of overplayed it, and there's just a certain, you also have to realize, being from Arkansas, there has been a cottage industry, a negative cottage industry when it comes to I don't know what it is about those two that sets people off, man, but boy.
Because it was this poor dude from Hope, Texas, from Hope, Arkansas, Whitewater, you remember all of that kind of
I was there. I'm literally I was still in Little Rock when he became president. And I think a lot of it, people don't know how much money is in Arkansas. And they did not at the time. They probably do now, because everybody knows about Walmart and Tyson Foods and all that stuff. But we're talking about the mid 90s. So you had all of the intelligentsia, all the Beltway press and all of these people. And so, I'd be sitting in a hotel bar, and, there's Brett Hume before he lost his mind, when he was with one of the networks.
When he was sensible,
It was just a regular guy. I mean, you would see Warren Christopher, all these people just walking around in Little Rock, okay? And I think with the firm I worked for, these are two old white guys. One of them didn't even finish, forget high school. This guy didn't finish elementary school. I think he had like a 5th grade education. He's a billionaire. But it wasn't, stock options and this Elon Musk, all this smoke and mirror. These guys had built businesses, funded businesses, the old-fashioned Gilded Age.
They followed the rules. They followed the basic rules of capitalism.
And they made a lot of money over a period of 50 or 60 years. And, on paper, they were billionaires. I think when people came to Little Rock, in their mind, they were thinking, folks of a certain age will know what I'm. They were expecting the Beverly Hillbillies.
Right. I know. Hey, we got that in Spanish in Panama, man.
They were in banjos and Deliverance and all of that.
Yeah.
And there were guys that I worked with, driving Porsches and freaking Maseratis and stuff in Little Rock. And they were like, something's got to be wrong. Somebody's got to be stealing. And it's so funny to me, because now there's some for real stealing going on, and they're not really looking that hard,
because it has never been about honesty. I mean, and that I think, and today is MLK Day, and we're talking about MLK, and I think a lot of what MLK stood for, and a lot the injustices that he talked about, the genesis is right there, Marlon. I mean, and when he decided, and folks, I want you to listen to this part. When he decided to stop I shouldn't say stop. When he decided that it wasn't really just a racialization issue, it was a lot deeper than it. I beg others to read some of his newer stuff. 67, right? Miami, New York church, etc. This guy was getting dated. In fact, if we're in different times, this guy would sound a lot like the stuff that me and other guys talk when we talk about what an economy should really look like as opposed to this capitalistic fraud. He would sound like that. And I am sitting down there reading the stuff and it's like, my God, he was Bernie on steroids before anybody knew about Bernie.
It's so interesting to me. I saw something. I can't remember what the rating was, but it was very low. It was talking about how, just his approval rating. People did not
hated him.
Same thing, like Ali. And it's so interesting to me how America tries to sanitize these guys, Fortunately,
there's a purpose, Marlon. There's
yes.
Listen, you understand how it works in America. Martin Luther King is an icon for a lot of people. If you don't sanitize his history, when people read his history like you and I are discussing now with what he really stood for economically, what he really stood for militarily, if that is your hero and that's what he stood for, oh my God, our system has got to change because that's our hero. The same applies for everything about how our country was formed and all of that sort of thing. You have to sanitize it or you run into two troubles. One, things are the way we got here was a lot worse than you thought. And two, those that we have as heroes really didn't want this. They wanted something a lot better,
Well said. Yeah, it's that's why I like guys like Ta-Nehisi Coates and that really get into, that's the whole thing with American exceptionalism. It's really kind of problematic.
Yeah.
Because, it's the whole story of how these, the Mayflower and these folks, this rugged individualism, and they just came over here and built everything with, bootstraps and all that stuff. And then when you start looking at it, it's not that pretty at all.
It's never been about bootstraps. The British Empire, the American Empire was always built on the same thing. Extracting both resources from others and the labor of others.
Yes, sir.
I mean, the wealthy never made a penny of their wealth. I'm not talking about when you look, Marlon is a very hard worker. He did his work and he earned everything he has. And there are even some relatively rich people, $10 million, $20 million. They earned it. Nobody earned $1 billion. Nobody earned this. Nobody. And it is a framing that we have got to change. In America, we've got to change the framing, and that's what I'm doing. That's what you're doing.
I think in one of the things, and we talk about social media usually in a sort of broadly negative light, but in a lot of ways, it's sort of like letting the genie out of the bottle.
Yes.
For those who take advantage of it, the information's there. And you can't, there's a good friend of mine on Substack, Khalil Green, and his Substack is History Can't Hide or something like that.
Right.
And that's the thing I really enjoy. I mean, I spend a lot of time. I enjoy history and learning about, these little known facts. Of course, now you got to double and triple check it just to make sure it's not made up. But it is difficult for them to keep the truth from us now.
Yes.
Because they put a computer in everybody's pocket. So for all the bad crap that comes along with that, and, of course, they can spy on us all and do whatever. But at the same time, if you really are interested, you can learn a lot.
And, I love that. And that, you know what, though, Marlon, and that's because they know all that information is readily available for all to see. That is the reason why they are adamant about getting rid of critical thinking. They are adamant about controlling where you have access. They are adamant of promoting a kind of religiosity that have you think in a hierarchical form. And that is the things that you and I and all of us that are doing this Substack multimedia, whether it be on Substack and all these other framings, that is what we have to fight against, to make sure that people continue to realize that they can think on their own and they can learn on their own. And one of the other things that you and I would never fail to do is say, hey, if you hear Marlon say something, we don't mind you double checking it. If you hear me say something, we hope
my tagline for the journeyman is is opinion with receipts, because a lot of things I say may be news to some people. And I always try to have at least, you don't want to just overwhelm folks with links, but I want you to check me. And I'm not saying I'm infallible. I'm sure that
we all make mistakes.
But not intentionally. That's the thing you really got to watch is a lot of folks can, and there are people on this platform that are in, the top 10 in culture and stuff like that. And they would have you believe that the Civil War was, white people trying to get rid of slavery. And, and now it was, and so many white folks did not like slavery. And it's like, okay.
The misinformation is amazing. But Marlon, look, I came and wanted to have this discussion with you about Martin Luther King and the reality of Martin Luther King, which I think also we inferred by our discussion. But as usual, I asked you for half an hour, Marlon. I asked you for half an hour. How ridiculous was that? That we tried, but I got to go prepare for my 3:00 show. But let me just tell you this, Marlon. I have so much respect for you, and I want to thank you for on a dime having this conversation, because I wanted to have the conversation on MLK on MLK's Day, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to you. I also want to urge our folks to visit the Journeyman, which is our brother here, Marlon Weems, and of course Egberto Off the Record, which is yours truly. And please, I always try to end these things to say, look, independent media is a must. So I'm going to ask you to say something about independent media before I close.
Well, I think we're almost to a place where it's all we've got. Because if you look at the landscape, and I don't just mean in terms of news, in terms of, what we consider news, politics and economic, the stuff that's kind of my wheelhouse, even though I write about other things, I think, and I'm actually working on a piece now talking about the movie Sinners, and I won't, no spoilers.
Whoa, I saw that movie.
Okay, I've seen it twice, and there aren't very many movies outside of The Godfather and Goodfellas, because I like gangster movies. But I'm telling you, it really unveils just what has happened with media. Period. So there are a lot of folks on this platform that know, the movie business inside out. There are folks who know a lot of things, and we are not constrained by having, to worry about quarterly numbers and shareholders and all of that. So as I said, we're all we have. I've been fortunate. Next month will be 6 years on Substack for me. So way before this was even this is all gravy for me. And, I'm not one of the biggest guys out there, but I think I know there have been people that have been on the bandwagon since the beginning. And it surprised me. And it's just so, it gives you hope for humanity when people bet on you.
That is what it's all about. There's nothing like seeing somebody supporting you and the thanks that you have for them supporting you. And you're so right about that. We are all that we have. And,
and I just want to, just say there are folks in this. I'm just seeing people that are in this conversation that, that have supported me. I mean, not just
ditto,
just the little things. I mean, I won't embarrass them, but there's somebody in this room, literally, you've heard me talk about expanding into more of a multimedia sort of a footprint. And there's somebody in this room that basically has made it possible for me to expand onto YouTube. And, it's easy to flip the switch.
Right.
But I mean, in a way that
hold your hands.
Want, because let's face it, we can't come in there sloppy.
Right.
So I mean, that kind of thing, man, it's always a surprise when it happens. And it just, especially when you're down, because this is not easy work to just get up every day and want to do this stuff. And
it's a lot of work, but I
hear you, Eric. We got to catch up, man. So Dr. Eric Lulove is in the room there.
I love this guy. I'm interviewing him this week.
He's on the rise, because he's in my feed all the time now.
Let me just say something about this guy, because I interview folks, and I went ahead and looked some stuff up, and I'm like, this guy is my hero. Read up on some of the stuff he does in Florida for people, the indigent, etc.
I saw a piece the other day, just a note that he wrote, and especially because, as you know, I fractured my leg over the Christmas holidays, and I'm still dealing with that, and a leg wound that came out of it. And the only point is, I'm gonna nail him down, because I want to do this, alive,
right,
with someone who understands exactly what I'm going through and also understands insurance.
Well, brother, I got him. I got the doctor first, man. I got the doctor first, man.
Maybe we should draw straws.
I got him first, and we're going to talk about healthcare. We're on talk politics, the right kind of way that America needs to hear. Not, but Mr. Weems, you did it to me again. This is a half-hour show turned into an hour. I gotta go
do anything for less than 45 minutes.
Man, I love you, man. I love you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, my friend. And to the audience, you don't know what it means to have you here. This is what we do, and one of the things we ask: share this stuff. If there's anything you learn, share it. That is how we create geometric progression and make the necessary changes. Marlon, it is my honor always to have you on. Audience, it's my honor that you've been listening to us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye. I want to show you something that is actually wrong with not just the mainstream media, but how we have given control to those who are bullies and otherwise. Well, it turns out that the MS Now host had a PM from Denmark on her program, meaning a parliamentary member, that is. And, she made him listen to Stephen Miller, and Stephen Miller went on a rant as to Denmark being a small country. They don't have the power, small economy. They don't have the power to control Greenland. And after he said that, the Danish PM had the perfect response, the perfect analogy. I want you to listen to this. But before, I want to keep in your mind what he said and how apropos it was. And at the end, I want you to see what the MS Now host said. If you want to know why Americans are confused, if you want to know why Americans don't know for sure that what Donald Trump is doing is wrong, is evil, is imperialistic, the fact that we have, well, I tell you what, listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Rasmus, you may be somewhat dismayed to hear what one of Donald Trump's senior advisors, Stephen Miller, had to say. Please take a listen to this. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Denmark is a tiny country with a tiny economy and a tiny military. They cannot defend Greenland. They cannot control the territory of Greenland. Under every understanding of law that has existed about territorial control for 500 years, to control a territory, you have to be able to defend a territory, improve a territory, inhabit a territory. Denmark has failed on every single one of these tests.
Rasmus, you gave a pretty comprehensive answer, pretty much countering everything Stephen Miller had to say before I asked this question. But if you could say one thing to Stephen Miller, what would you like to say?
I hope he's kept away from young women, because that's the mentality of a rapist. You can't defend yourself, so I'm going to take you. That's basically what he's saying. And it has never been like that in international law that he's saying. On the contrary, the United States have signed several treaties with Denmark recognizing the ownership. One of them was in 1917. Actually, you see the painting right behind my shoulder here? Those men that you can just see there, they sold the Virgin Islands to the Americans in 1917. Part of that deal was you get the Virgin Islands and you recognize full Danish control over Greenland. So it has never been the U.S. position that we don't have a right to Greenland. They signed several treaties, and the entire world voted for Greenland's full integration into Denmark in 1954 in the UN Plenary Assembly in New York, including the United States. So this is a new position from the American government, and we have to be able to trust the promises, the words, and the alliances that we make with the Americans, because otherwise it's not worth anything being an ally of the Americans. And I think it's very crucial that we stay together because our alliance, our partnership has kept us safe. U.S. administration is saying they don't want their adversaries to take over Greenland, but please don't make Europe your adversaries. We don't want that.
All right, Rasmus, I will say that there was a very harsh analogy that you made there at the top of this answer. I understand that is your opinion and the analogy you wanted to make. I will say that we don't share in that opinion here at MS Now, but I do appreciate your conversation overall and all of the points that you have made. Thank you so much.
So he's right. He's absolutely right. That is the mentality of a rapist. Sorry. You can't argue that point. In other words, I have more power than you do, so I can take anything from you, including self, because I have the power to do it. Imagine if the world really worked like that. Imagine if the world really worked like that. But anyway, I think the most pathetic part of this entire story is when the host decided to say, we just need to tell you that is this guy's characterization, but MS Now, we don't think anything like that. And of course, if you're the listener to MS Now, you're going to ask yourself, well, MS Now, was what he said wrong? Was what he said explosive? And since you are my source of information, maybe I need to think about it differently. MS Now, I am sorry. We have to be definitive in the way we say things. We must be able to say what Trump is doing with Venezuela, what Trump is doing with Greenland and Denmark is absolutely imperialistic and wrong. We have borders that the world has agreed on right now. And for this main power to go ahead and say, well, I want Greenland, I'm sorry. That should be something every single network, every single politician should be speaking out against as something that puts all our lives in danger.
All of our country's problems, from polarization to ignorance on domestic and international issues to a complete misunderstanding of our economic and healthcare systems, are a direct result of a derelict mainstream media that too often bend over backwards to support corporate or bought politicians' wants as opposed to the people's needs for real information to make their lives better. Independent media is the only solution to inform truthfully and factually. Why? Because our loyalties are to you, the ones who fund us with small dollar contributions and subscriptions. Please consider supporting our independent media platforms by subscribing to our Egberto Off the Record newsletter at politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. Again, that is politicsdoneright.com/newsletter. It's an investment that pays incalculable dividends.